After an intense 48 hours, Israel's military attack in the West Bank city of Jenin has ended. What was accomplished and how are Palestinians responding? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. The Israeli government says at least 50 attacks against its citizens in recent months were launched from the West Bank city of Jenin. Fast forward to the early hours of Monday when more than 1,000 Israeli troops, backed by drones, tanks and missiles, raided the city's refugee camp. Israel's stated goal to root out the Palestinian militant infrastructure. When it was over, at least 12 Palestinians and 1 Israeli soldier were killed, with homes, cars and streets left damaged or destroyed. And Israel's Prime Minister warning of more raids to come. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Amotz Asa-El is a fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute and a senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post. Abdul Bari Atwan is editor-in-chief of Rai Al-Yum, that's a London-based Arab news and opinion website. Also with us is Jeremy Saltan. He is a former advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennet's party Yamina. And Khalil Jahshan is executive director of the Arab Center right here in Washington, D.C. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Khalil Jahshan, let me start with you. More than 1,000 Israeli troops, tanks, armored personnel carriers, drones used in this attack on the refugee camp in Jenin, that's in the occupied West Bank. As I said, at least 12 Palestinians killed, 1 Israeli soldier killed. The Israelis say that what they were targeting were militant infrastructure. They say that attacks against Israeli civilians were planned and emanated from this refugee camps. What is your assessment of what happened?
Essentially, it's kind of an ill-devised, if you will, plan, an onslaught on Jenin with faulty logic. Like you just mentioned, quoting Israeli leaders saying that it's in response to more than 50 attacks on Israeli citizens. Israel as a state, of course, is entitled to defend its own citizens within their own territory. But to talk about resistance in an occupied territory where Israel is the occupying power, where it has illegally settled hundreds of thousands of settlers, to expect resistance to that Israeli step and to the presence of these settlers in occupied territories is the ultimate hasbara, faulty, if you will, disinformation that has been used by Israel for so long. We are talking here about a battalion, a whole battalion of Israeli soldiers, closer to 2,000, basically involved in a battle against just a few hundred fighters or militants, which Israel doesn't like to use the term. Of course, they call them terrorists, in an area that's 104 acres. It's 0.16 square miles, loaded with refugees, about 15 to 20,000 refugees in that limited area, and claiming to be fighting terrorism. Well, you know, they've killed 10, 12 people. So what about the rest? Is the problem settled? Did they achieve their goals? I doubt it seriously, because I think they have failed in achieving their goals, essentially, which is to maintain settlement activities and occupation.
All right, let me go to Jeremy for his view on this. Jeremy, did the Israelis achieve their goals?
Well, the military said that they did, and the government said that they did. So I would say that, yes, Israel was able to accomplish the goals. I want to just respond to a few things that were mentioned right before me. I think it's important to remind the audience at home that as part of the Oslo Accords, Israel left the areas of the Palestinian major population centers such as Jenin. When we're talking about the battalion that went in for the mission, that's just it. They went into the territory for the mission, meaning they are not sitting there all of the time. And the ones that were targeted, this is not Palestinian Authority, this is not Palestinian police. Yes, those are terrorists. Those are people who've gone out and decided to attack or tried to attack Israeli citizens. And Israel, as any other country, went ahead and responded by going to the source to deal with it. Because unfortunately, whether it's because the Palestinian Authority cannot or because they just do not want to, we're not able to deal with the situation themselves.
Abdel Bari Hartman, what is your response to that? I mean, Jeremy says that this was not the Palestinian Authority that was attacked, not Palestinian police, that under the Oslo Accords, Palestinians have a degree of self-determination in this particular area.
You know, what do you expect, Palestinian, a refugee, you know, for the last 75 years, you know, in that camp, which is less than half square kilometers, as Dr. Jahshan said. What do you expect them to do? You know, the Israeli promised them 30 years ago that, you know, by negotiation, they will have a full independent Palestinian state. But when those people are humiliated, when they are under siege, when they are deprived all their rights, when they don't have a statehood, what do you expect them to do? To throw the Israeli with flowers, you know? When they are, this is not the first time the Israeli attacked a Jenin refugee camp. You know, they did it before several times, and they killed a lot of people and innocent people in the refugee camps. Now they are saying that they are terrorists. They, you know, the Israeli are defending themselves. How they are defending themselves?
Okay.
Did Jenin camp attack the Israeli, or the Israeli attacked the Jenin camp?
Okay, Abdel Bari Hartman, I want you to listen to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is justifying these killings, injuries, and destruction on this territory. It's occupied territory, occupied by Israel. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
Our forces enter Jenin into the terrorist nest. They eliminate terrorists. They arrest wanted persons. They destroy headquarters and seize many weapons. And they do another thing. They destroy laboratories on an almost industrial scale. Laboratories from which they create explosives, intended for the slaughter and murder of Israeli civilians.
Okay, Abdel Bari Hartman, the Israeli Prime Minister also pointed to attacks on Israeli civilians, up to 50 in recent months. You have written in your newspaper, you wrote this, you said the Palestinians will never surrender but fight to the last bullet and last drop of blood. So where is this heading?
You know, again, what shall I say? You know, shall I say the Palestinians should surrender and actually, you know, accept the Israeli humiliation which is taking place every minute in the West Bank? Do you expect the Palestinian to accept 800,000 settlers in the West Bank, which is supposed to be, you know, the base of the independent Palestinian state? Yes, the Palestinians, they are entitled to resist the occupation. This is you know, a right which actually recognized by all of the international community, all international organization. So the Palestinians, yes, you know, they will fight the resistance. They will fight the occupation, and they want to get rid of it. It is actually legal. It is normal. All these third world countries, African countries, South, you know, they fought the occupation and they gained liberation. The Palestinians are not exceptional.
Okay, Amotz, Asa-El, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom, Hussam Zomlot, he pointed out that under international law, the Palestinians have a right to resist the occupation. And as Abdel Bari Hartman just pointed out, there is a history of that. We've seen that history over the last century. Is the Israeli default position now that this cannot be resolved diplomatically, that it's going to be this kind of military stalemate?
I think that on both sides of this mayhem, we have governments that are not seeking actively, at least, peace, and that's a tragedy. And what is happening on top of that is that the Palestinian Authority's leadership right now is utterly ineffective because of its leader, Mahmoud Abbas's age. He's pushing 90 and refusing to clear the stage, and let alone point at a successor or groom one visibly. And that result of that is political vacuum in the Palestinian areas. And it is into that vacuum that all these terrorists, as we in Israel call them, I realize to some people's displeasure, they get sucked into this vacuum, and this is what we currently face.
Khalil, Jahshan, there you heard it. The Palestinian Authority is utterly ineffective. That's the authority and its leader, Mahmoud Abbas. I mean, what has the Palestinian Authority done towards moving the Palestinians towards securing a state of their own and towards maintaining the safety of Palestinians?
Well, Anand, with all due respect, I mean, if you were to invite Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, to join us on this panel, he would spend the next 10 hours delineating all the progress he has made and all the diplomatic efforts he has made to end the occupation. And it's the other side that's not responding and refusing to consider a return to the negotiating table. But that's not the issue. I think Amotz has a point. The Palestinian Authority is paralyzed. It is an authority under occupation. It doesn't have, as a matter of fact, the camp that was attacked, that we're talking about, the Jenin camp, is part of the area that's supposed to be the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority. Yet the Israelis move in and out at their own pleasure, undermining the authority of Abu Mazen Abbas and weakening him even beyond the point where he is. He is weak. He has not delivered. The PA has not delivered on ending the occupation, and it has to move forward. I mean, to move, be replaced, in other words. But that's not the problem. Accusing the Palestinians of having a weak leadership, that's not an Israeli forte, with all due respect. I like Amotz and his ideas. I'm very familiar with his contributions over the years. He's a great historian and a writer. But the Israeli leadership, as he implied, I think, in his remark, is not either a great leadership. I mean, talking about a weak leadership that's totally not only not committed to peace, but opposed to peace. This is the type of leadership Israel has elected, and therefore we're facing this predicament.
Amotz, what do you make of Khalil's analysis there?
Well, I say that the Israeli leadership that the Israeli public has elected this time around is a symptom of the demise of the Oslo Accords, which will soon turn 30. And I believe that in the future, they will be recalled as a development that preceded its time, but ultimately this, or some version of what we attempted 30 years ago, is what will transpire. The only question is, until that moment, God knows when it will be. I doubt it's going to be in my generation. But when it comes, or until it comes, the question is how much blood is shed. That is, in my view, the essence of what is happening these days. Both sides are entrenched, and neither side has the kind of leadership, the kind of Anwar Sadat leadership that is prepared, or Yitzhak Rabin leadership that is prepared to make bold steps and serious sacrifices and storm the future rather than worship the past.
Jeremy, Israel says that this was an operation targeting Palestinian groups, armed groups, that it was an act of self-defense. So how does that square with a statement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which was cited in the Jerusalem Post, which itself was quoting Israeli state radio, in which he said that the goal is to crush any Palestinian attempt at statehood. The Jerusalem Post quotes him as telling a parliamentary committee, Palestinian hopes of establishing a state, quote, must be eliminated.
My understanding was that those quotes were not confirmed. They were said in a closed hearing of the Knesset Defense and Affairs Committee. What I can speak to is, again, the operation that we saw. We saw, as we've seen in every Israeli operation since Israel's existence, where the targets were people who were on a list because of terrorist activity. Unfortunately, like each one of these operations, you have situations of collateral damage, but that's the exact difference between and the we are fighting. The ones that we are targeting are people who are choosing the way of violence, whereas the people who are choosing to, we're talking about expectations before. Expectation is that someone who decides to specifically harm innocent people by attacking women and children and civilians, that someone like that should not get any defense or any protection by anybody, and that any state that cares.
Jeremy, my question was about, the Prime Minister saying that the goal is to crush any Palestinian attempt at statehood. And in fact, the Jerusalem Post did go to that committee and the Prime Minister's office, and nobody's denied what he said.
No one's confirmed it either, though. Again, usually what happens, and this is just the protocol of what happens when the Prime Minister goes and speaks in closed-door meetings that are classified, that you do not confirm nor deny what was said at that very meeting. I think that it's very, again, unfortunate that there are people who've decided to go ahead and say things when they know that according to the usual protocol, that's something in which typically, you do not have a response. And again, I'm saying this as a person who's also advised a prime minister. That's just the protocol when it comes to these type of closed sessions within the Knesset Foreign Affairs Committee.
Abdel Bari Atwan, I want to get back to that piece that you wrote in Rai al-Yum. It was a very strong piece, and one of the other things you said, and I'm quoting you here, you said, if President Mahmoud Abbas cannot protect his people and halt the ongoing Israeli massacre in Jenin, he should announce the dissolution of his Palestinian Authority. And we just heard from Khalil Jahshan, who told us that if Mahmoud Abbas was here and asked to explain his role in this, he would tell us that he's been trying for a long time to get Palestinian statehood. But from what you've written here, my question is, has the Palestinian Authority failed Palestinians? In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu called the Palestinian Authority Israel's, quote, subcontractor.
I would like to remind you that in coming September, it will be the 30th years of signing Oslo Agreement on the loan of the White House. And Mahmoud Abbas and Yasser Arafat were there. They committed themselves to protect the Israeli, and they established a security forces of more than 60,000, and they were protecting the Israeli, protecting the settlers who actually occupied the West Bank, or building their settlements on the territory of the West Bank. What happened? Abbas is very weak. He is not accepted by the Israeli, and he is not loved by the Palestinian. He is protecting the Israeli, but he is not protecting the Palestinian people. 60,000 of his security forces never actually faced the Israeli, never said to the Israeli, enough is enough. You cannot attack Jenin refugee camps. You cannot attack Nablus. You cannot, those are, the protection of those people is the responsible of the Palestinian Authority. So nothing like that happened at all. And you mentioned, thank you very much to that, Benjamin Netanyahu said, we shouldn't actually allow the Palestinian to have independent state. So if somebody is saying that, those people should be under occupation forever. And maybe his government will annex the West Bank any minute, any day. And I believe this actually attack against the resistance in order to root out them, to prepare the ground for the annexation of the West Bank. So I believe Mahmoud Abbas nearly finished, and he was weakened by the Israeli, not by the Palestinian, and his authority is non-existent on the ground completely, and they want Abbas to be actually a part of the Israeli, and his security forces part of the Israeli army, part of the Israeli intelligence service, and this wouldn't work. What will work is to implement the peace treaty. What is going to work is to establish independent Palestinian state. Otherwise, we will have the same thing repeated in Jenin, maybe in a week, maybe in a month or a year.
All right, I want to give Khalil Jahshan a chance to briefly respond to that. Go ahead.
I agree. I think what Abdel Bari Atwan wrote expresses the view of a majority of Palestinians at this time. I mean, Abu Mazen's popularity right now is in the single digits, and people feel that he has failed to basically secure the basic rights and aspirations of the Palestinian people. Netanyahu was quite right. Let's not hide behind technicalities, whether it has been confirmed or not. Israel has a censored media, and this wouldn't have appeared in mainstream media in Israel if it weren't confirmed. And the Israeli government, Netanyahu's office, hasn't denied it. Israel's vision today is of no peace. It's annexation, and it's moving a step forward toward total apartheid in all of Palestine. What he did, what Netanyahu did in Jenin camp, is mowing the lawn, to use an IDF term or concept. They are, as Abdul Bari just said, preparing the soil for total annexation and establishing Jewish apartheid over the West Bank.
Amotz, since the beginning of this year until about mid-June, there's been about 114 Palestinians who've been killed in attacks by the Israelis. Also last year we had that journalist who was killed. Her funeral was attacked afterwards as well. We also had the Israeli security minister, Ben-Gvir, who now wants to make it easier for Israelis, this is ordinary civilian Israelis, to obtain gun permits and carry guns. Where is this leading? I mean, are we going to see an escalation of violence?
I think Itamar Ben-Gvir is in no position to shape reality. He's a talker, he's a demagogue, and Netanyahu himself is keeping him at arm's length and does not bring him into his inner cabinet consultations. Parenthetically, I should add that that's against Israeli custom, but that's besides the point. He does not matter, and the measures that he proposes are pandering to the orchestra, and they will not affect reality. Israelis, anyhow, are heavily armed. Almost every middle-aged Israeli male knows how to handle weapons, and many thousands possess weapons. So if his idea is to have several more hundred people possess weapons, I don't see how that's going to affect anything, for better or for worse. The fact is that we're in the throes of a very violent conflict whose parties right now are not in peace mode. That's where we are. I think we can bicker here in this panel over how that happened. Of course, Israelis like myself, who have responded to this process from its inception. I'm already past 60. And Israelis like myself who applauded it all along and sincerely hoped and did their best to make it mature, think that the crux of the problem, historically speaking, was the Palestinian Authorities' failure to stem the systematic deployment of terrorists since the late 1990s. This is how Shimon Peres lost power after succeeding Yitzhak Rabin, and this is how Barak lost power after taking the most bold steps any Israeli leader ever took at Camp David in 2000. And ever since then, we've been with a succession of governments that were not quite as forthcoming because of all that violence. This is what we faced. Concerning Abbas, once again, the history is that the moment in which he came closest to striking a deal with Israel was during the Ehud Olmert premiership. And as Ehud Olmert himself testifies, they met dozens of times and it seemed promising. When it came time to sign on the dotted line, he failed to do that. And ever since then, we've been with a succession of governments that would not offer what Ehud Olmert did offer in the name of the Israeli majority.
All right, Jeremy, let me get your view on the Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. I mean, he is on the extreme right flank of the government, which is a right-wing government, an extreme right-wing government. As we just heard Amotz tell us, he doesn't matter. Even the Prime Minister keeps him at arm's length.
Yeah, I mean, he's not my cup of tea. I think it's clear that a majority of the Israeli public does not see him as someone who is the representative. He possesses at the moment 6 seats out of 120 in our parliament. Yet, very important position as the national security minister. And as you see right here, despite the fact that there are much bigger parties, he's the one that's getting the headlines.
Abdel Bari Atwan, there has been some anger expressed in Arab states over this latest attack in Jenin. But if we look at some of the other states, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Morocco, According to the Western news agency Reuters, they are sticking with Israel. This British news agency quotes analysts as saying economic interests will trump moral outrage. What do you make of that? Have some Arab countries turned their backs on the Palestinian cause?
No, I believe now there are Arab countries who are coming back to the Palestinian. If you look at the statements which were issued by United Arab Emirates, by Saudi Arabia, even by Morocco, the people who signed Abraham agreement, peace agreement recently, it is a very, very strong statements. It is a letter to the Israelis saying that, look, you crossed all the red lines. You are embarrassing us. We signed peace with you, but you are, by doing this, storming the Jenin refugee camps by Apache helicopters, by drones, by more than 2,000 soldiers, by about 150 tanks and armored vehicles. Doing this actually embarrass us among all our people. And the latest statistics are saying that people who supported Abraham agreement, peace agreement in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, it's dropped from 55% to less than 22%. And this is before Jenin storming by the Israeli, or stormed by the Israelis. So I believe these countries are changing their position dramatically because of these Israeli atrocities.
Okay, Khalil, Jahshan, I've only got a minute left, but I want to get your view on something that Amotz Asa-El said a moment ago, and that is Mahmoud Abbas did have an opportunity when Ehud Olmert was president to sign an agreement with the Israelis, and he missed that when Ehud Olmert was prime minister.
Well, I think passing judgment on that period is in the eye of the beholder. As a person who has been involved very closely with all these talks and having met with the leaders that were involved in these talks, including meeting with Rabin and Peres and Olmert and Barak and what have you, it's in the eye of the beholder. Everybody is blaming the others. There were a lot of mistakes made by everybody. It was definitely a historic missed opportunity. But again, blaming the weakest link in the chain is not going to solve the problem.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.